One thing you said is being, or maybe the lady you talked to, remind me her name, Marilyn.
Marlene.
Marlene,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Be authentic, safe, and respectful.
Yeah, I wrote those down
Yeah.
and she said it in that order.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so advice to the counselor being, and I think of what one of my profs said is, don't talk about safety. Don't say, I want this to be a safe space. You make it a safe space.
Yeah.
That's an experiential thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes if you talk too much about being authentic, safe, and respectful.
Yeah.
These are not things you talk about. These are things that you become.
Mm-hmm.
So you are in yourself. Authentic. Do the work so you can be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Do the work so you can be safe.
Yeah.
And I would add to this, like, the work includes the education, the understanding.
Yeah.
To be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to talk about it if you're being respectful.
Mm-hmm.
I think I learned a lot from that prof about that. As soon as I think I want to say something out loud about trying to be respectful or anything like that, like, no, you show it.
Yeah.
You have to show respect.
Absolutely.
And learn how to show it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Etiquette with elders was specifically important.
Mm-hmm. I wish that I would have asked her a little bit more about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only experience I have, and I'm still learning too, right? I have a few elders around who have been very open and giving of their knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful, not to be gatekeeping it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times gatekeeping can also be confused with also actually just trying to protect our intellectual property and our knowledge and from being exploited. But etiquette around elders, as with Indigenous folks, like, again, you're going to be spending a bit of time visiting. And that's if they want to visit with you. Are you really going to listen to them? Yeah. Are you really going to internalize that and really just be willing to slow down? Because I get caught up in that too, Devaney. I get caught up. I feel like everybody gets just a little bit of me, you know, and it's hard. So I try to slow down. I try to stop and be present for my children. I try to slow down and be present for my mom. Yeah. And I think that's a society thing. It's deeply embedded in us. We're just busy all the time. But if you want to have a meaningful conversation with some elders, you're going to have to slow down and be present.
And what strikes me with that is that's going to make us a better counselor in general anyway. I mean, we're always trying to get attuned with ourselves and try to process and be present. But, you know, that's something that's going to be especially important. Yeah. But it's going to improve everything.
Elders tell a lot of stories too. So stories on how they relate. So sometimes an elder could be telling you a story and your brain is off somewhere else thinking it's about this, but this is what the story was about. Yeah. That's deep in Indigenous culture.
Just staying with it, not jumping ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be hard to follow sometimes, but it takes work. It takes repetitive work and listening. And we talked about ceremony as well, having a deeper understanding about ceremony. Yeah. She talked to me about about being versed on ceremony and being careful not to appropriate. But she did mention about non-Indigenous folks, if they're going to have sage or sweetgrass there, to be very mindful about that, about the spirituality around that. So for Indigenous folks, our spirituality is inherent with our healing. The two are the same. They're not a separate thing. So I'm not entirely sure how much Western institutions touch on that about spirituality. So there's another layer again on top of we've talked about history, right? We've talked about knowing the history. We've talked about kinship, relationships, and ceremony. And so spirituality is deeply embedded with ceremony. So having an idea, even just an idea about what those mean. And it varies from different cultures.
Or asking,
Our ceremony and spirituality is different from the Cree. Everyone's got a different belief system and a creation story, and so it's a lot of work.
Like knowing what questions to ask around spirituality. No, I trained with a minor in theology. So my spirituality factored deeply into psychology and the way those things blended. And I think of with an Indigenous client, just knowing what questions to ask and not making assumptions, which we keep coming back to.
Because it varies. Yeah. A lot of Indigenous folks did adopt Christianity and Catholicism.
You wouldn't know going
but
in.
There was a number. When the missionaries came and they came to proselytize to Indigenous folks, there were different. Everyone was individual. It wasn't just this thing, and everyone adopted it. They weren't quick to adopt it, but they weren't quick to reject it either. So this is what I learned in history. And yes, there were groups that were just like, we don't need that. We didn't need this idea of one superior being. So I found that to be really interesting, because my own family did, like, there were members of my family who adopted that Christianity model. They broke away from that Catholic, and then and it's just like really individual, right? It's like a case by case, and you'll have to get to know that. And it's interesting. I mean, I struggled with that greatly for a long time, and now I'm a bit more accepting. I know what I need and I know what I don't need, but I'm also accepting of what works for people. If that is worked into their spirituality and that helps them sleep at night, then that's a good thing. That is not a bad thing. Well, so so I've gotten to this place.
You also talked about because we talked about culture's treatment, and we kind of wrestled with that idea whether an Indigenous person can be, what their role is. And your friend that you were talking to was saying that like a non-Indigenous person can have that role, but they need to be really careful of how they go about that in an appropriate way. And we talked about the balance between cultural, you have to help me with that, like misappropriation or cultural, what's the word?
So cultural appropriation, for example, would be like a non-Indigenous person
setting up a sweat lodge.
Yes. Setting up a sweat lodge. Yeah, absolutely. Example, or coming in and like immediately smudging. You have to understand that some, like for me, it's not a part of my culture, but I've always been gifted sage and tobacco and sweetgrass. I'm constantly gifted it all the time. So I consider that important. So I use those medicines, but I'm very cautious about when and my intent around it. And sometimes people don't want to be smudged. They're not ready. So there's a whole set of principles even around that. So if you have someone come in and all of a sudden I'm just going to let a little bit of sweetgrass here and they're like, no. Yeah. So the
responsibility comes with that. But also, like, there's an invitation to be involved in that and facilitating that. But then with that invitation comes responsibility to know, to be educated, to ask, and to keep it inappropriate. And I bet that's gone sideways lots.
Probably. Yeah.
I would think it's gone sideways lots.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, maybe the instincts are right to include culture as treatment, and instinctually, and, they'll know that a key to Indigenous persons' healing is culture. And yet it can get a little off kilter.
Yeah, if it's not done appropriately,
Yeah. And one thing I had kind of clued into earlier, and what really made sense to me, why culture can be treatment rather than a side to treatment, is a lot of people's trauma and pain came through, was experienced culturally. I don't know really how to explain that, but a lot of it was done and was done to them because of their culture. And I think of examples in my own family. On my husband's side of the family, they were on the receiving side of abuse and discrimination because of their Indigenousness. And it would make sense to me that their healing would be Indigenous, because that's where their pain, where their injury, that's where their wound is. So just innately, I think, well, where that wound is, what would be appropriate to that would be an Indigenous, something culturally that would replace that wound. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It resonates with me because, again, with our identity, that was something that was frowned upon. Like, this is something that you want to move away from. And that's how we have found healing. That's how all of us have moving back to that. Yeah. Yes, I want to claim my indigeneity. I don't want to be ashamed about it. I don't want the stereotypes. I don't have to pick up any of that. I get to take my power back. It's like taking your power back.
Yeah.
You know, that return to home. Even from here, I can make that visit.
And I can see logistically how important it would be to have appropriate cultural treatments available that are authentic.
Yeah.
Because we ran into that anyway. Like, well, who do we call? To have these healing type experiences, and I think those are going to grow. Yeah. But having non-Indigenous people take that over would be, you would want to be pretty careful. Yeah.
Yeah, not completely, right? Like we still, I think, like being, what's the right word? Like a vessel, like to help guide,
facilitating. I think of that for me, if I could facilitate something.
That's culturally appropriate.
That would be ideal.
I know in my own family, so like when the missionaries came over, again, they proselytized Inuvialuit quickly, and they separated. There was like Protestant and there was Anglican and Catholic, and so they sort of like really set a lot of people up for division in our communities. And it was discouraged, like even our practices, like our cultural healing practices, that was like discouraged.
Yeah.
So we still run into those problems now where it's like, I still have family members say like, oh, like we don't do like Inuvialuktun names, like that's not something. Yes. But for me, that's what resonates with me. So it's just a matter of, and it doesn't mean that I stop talking to that family. I just understand that they're not there, and that's okay. It's not for me to decide.
Yeah, I almost think for me personally, like as a Christian who's a counselor, we almost have a whole nother topic on spirituality that would be very helpful for me.
Yeah.
We're doing good. Right, that we haven't even touched on.
Yeah.
We'll save that for another cup of tea. So we have the kinship, the understanding culture. Yes. Is there anything then, we have quite a list that starts from the basic correction of our historical understanding.
That's vital. I just want to, I can't highlight that enough. That one. Take some history courses. Take some comprehensive history courses that go way back. Like, I'm not talking in the last 100 years. I'm talking like, let's go way back.
Well, and maybe we can include in the show notes something that's like gives people a link to go start exploring like what's available. Maybe we could do a little homework and put that together as something that if you're going to put some effort in that direction, here's a good place to start.
Well, last year or this year when the Pope finally rescinded that doctrine of discovery? So I imagine most folks didn't even know what that was, right. But these basic terms, these proclamations that happened way over there with people who had never even been to these lands before, like Terra Nullius and the Doctrine of Discovery, and then later the Royal Proclamation. Like, this is what I'm talking about. These sorts of things, because this really was setting the stage. It may have taken still a couple hundred years, but these things really set the stage for land theft at this level. So that's so again there. Really highlighting that historical content. I can't enough with that.
Because that's that having that correct orientation, trying to keep correcting that with history.
And like I said to you before, it really helped even me really sort of align me and redirect me into a more accurate. I can come now from a more accurate, knowledgeable place.
So you're not just saying for the non-Indigenous person, you're saying for everybody.
Oh, it helped. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. The idea of kinship, using culture appropriately. And I don't know, is there anything we've kind of missed on we're trying to get into what now that we understand the mismatch?
Yeah, well, I don't know when you wanted to touch on my relationship with my counselor and how it helped me. I don't know if we were saving that for the end or not.
I think
but
we can go into that now because as long as we've done those key points.